Hi everyone, it's Krista from Krista's Quilting Services. We are ready to start with week 3 of the Design Along. In week 3, we will be covering topics regarding choosing your fabric, how to cut and measure your pieces, the seam allowance that you'll need for stitching in week 4, and how to press your seams when you're working on getting those blocks that you're creating to lay flat. Let's do a little bit of fabric preparation here together. So I'm going to be starting with my smaller block quilt, and I decided that instead of using like 6 different colors for this one, that I'm going to make mine with a variety of green fabrics instead. And because they're a little bit lighter and some are brighter, I decided that I would pair it up with black for a background. And before I create my good blocks out of my good fabric, I want to do a test one first, just to make sure that my cutting measurements are correct, and that I've decided on an assembly method that makes a lot of sense for that block as well. So I'm going to move these aside, and that first thing with that fabric prep was to give everything a press. So I chose this for my background fabric, and I'm just going to leave the fold where it is on this piece, but I am going to take my iron and smooth it out a little bit here, just so that way there's not quite so many wrinkles and creases. This fabric has been sitting in a bucket that I've labeled estate sale, and basically it's just I will watch for yard sales and estate sales that have lots of fabric, and you can get fabric for really cheap. So most of this fabric will never actually end up in a actual quilt itself, but what I do use it for is when I need to practice something, and it lets me practice very cheaply, because fabric isn't really cheap. So when you are pressing, or I guess in this case actually just ironing, so I'm moving the iron along the fabric and letting the heat just sort of take out the wrinkles. So this is ironing. Pressing is setting it down for a couple seconds, lift it up, and move it. So that's the main difference between the two. And I'll give this one a go. So this bit of fabric here is going to be for the colored block placement, and that cream is going to fill in for my background. So these are now pressed and ready for the cutting portion. The next part in preparing our fabric is going to be getting ready to cut out all of those pieces that are going to be stitched together in order to make your quilt top. There are a couple options of tools available for cutting. You can use scissors, or you can use a rotary blade, a cutting mat, and an acrylic cutting ruler. Let's talk about the scissors first. So these are something that you probably already have at home. One thing you do want to make sure though is that your scissors are really sharp. So this pair of scissors has been used on like anything and everything. And when I go to cut, I only have a small portion of my scissors left that is actually sharp. And when I continue to cut, it just crushes my fabric in between. And I don't have much cutting action happening here. If you have a sharp pair of scissors and then reserve them for cutting fabric, they will be good for fabric for a very long time. And so these happen to be my good fabric scissors, and they cut the fabric just like that. So you can take your regular pair of scissors to a sharpener. Your fabric store may have a sharpening option for scissors, or a knife store might have an option for sharpening your scissors as well. Let's talk about making a paper template. This is the easiest way to draw out and cut those pieces of fabric that you're going to need. Trying to measure and keep things straight on the fabric itself is very time consuming. So you'll want a piece of cardstock or cardboard, something that's just a little bit heavier. And I need a square that is 5.5 by 5.5. So what I'm going to do is place the 5.5 inch line on the edge of my cardstock here. And I'm just going to kind of make a couple of little marks on my paper, because I'm going to also need to come across and mark 5.5 in from the other edge. And those marks are going to help me line up my ruler so I know how high up my page I need to go. And then I can draw that straight line. And then I can bring my ruler back down and get it lined up with that corner and draw my other line down. For this, you're going to want to have maybe a couple pairs of scissors, because one pair is going to be your paper cutting scissors and the other pair will be for your fabric. So you'll cut out your template, and you want this to be as accurate as you can possibly get it. Once your template's cut out, then you can put your fabric, usually if you put your fabric right side down, so the good side is faced on the bottom of your table, you don't have to worry about whatever your marking utensil is. If you're using a pencil or a pen, you don't have to worry about it becoming or continuing to be visible on the top of your quilt. So I'm going to take a pen and just sort of trace around the edges of my template. This fabric is pretty dark, so it is definitely a little tough to tell where my cutting lines are. So I am actually going to grab a bit of fabric chalk. And just go over all of that again. And then I will grab my fabric scissors that are sharp and just go ahead and cut out on the line that I traced. One thing that you'll notice with quilting is that nothing is fast about it. You do want to make sure that you take your time, that you are accurate with your cutting, and just enjoy the process. There we go. And now I have my 5.5 by 5.5 inch piece. And if I were piecing my entire quilt using, with not having the rotary cutter option, I would just continue tracing out around my square and cutting pieces out with a sharp pair of scissors. So let's take a look at what cutting out your pieces is going to look like if you've got a rotary blade, an acrylic ruler for quilting, and your cutting mat. The first thing that I'm going to make sure I have is that I'm removing the selvage edge on this piece. So I am going to place my ruler over top and sort of keep it in line so it's straight with my selvage edge. And I'm going to create sort of a straight line that I'm going to work from. So now that I have that straight line, and I need a 5.5 inch width of fabric for making my large blocks here, I'm going to cut over to the 5.5 inch line here, and I'm going to make that sure everything is nice and straight to the edge, the fabric edge that I created, and putting lots of weight down on my ruler so it doesn't move on me. I'm going to cut along here. So now I'm left with a 5.5 inch strip of fabric, and I don't necessarily know that these edges are straight, so I'm going to straighten them out next. And at this point, just to straighten out, it doesn't matter what numbers I pick. The only thing that's important is that I have a straight line here and a straight line following across at the top. And my ruler is going to be in just a little bit because I'm going to cut this bit off here, creating another straight edge. So now that I have that, I know it's straight. I'm going to turn it. And this is where, again, it doesn't matter what my numbers are here because I need to cut a 5.5 inch square. I'm going to find the 5.5 inch mark on my ruler going this way. And these are already 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.5 inches this way. And make sure my fabric is laying nice and flat. And everything should be lined up. It's going to be straight here, across the bottom and the top, and also down my 5.5 inch line. Give this another cut. And now I have one of my 5.5 inch blocks. And I need 2 of these for my test block. Checking that all my lines are lined up with the fabric as well. So it's straight across here. 5.5 inch mark is right here, and it's lined up and it matches across the top. So everything is, my fabric is even. And I have 4 very straight sides and a nicely cut 5.5 inch two 5.5-inch blocks. So the next ones that I need are my smaller squares here. And when we figured out that quilt math, we needed it to finish at 2.5 inches. So I need to cut 3 inches over here, and I need 2 of these. So I'm going to check. I have enough to get 2 of them out of this direction. I have 6.5 inches of fabric here. So I'm going to move this over to my 3-inch line. And I'm lining up against this line. This edge here I know is straight, and I know this edge is straight already from previous cuts. So I'm going to cut a 3-inch strip. I'm going to turn this, and I'm going to cut 2 more 3-inch pieces out of this. So a 3-inch piece. And you always want to make sure that you're checking your lines to make sure everything is square, and also that you're measuring in 1, 2, and 3 inches. If you cut too big or too small, then you will have to try again. So just like that, I have the colored block stand-in cut for my quilt top. Your cutting method is really up to you and what you have available or how much money you are willing to spend on this particular project.